Hi amigos, welcome to today's video. My name is Pam. I read a lot of books and I'm here today to talk to y'all about all the books that I've read in the past few weeks to months. This is going to be quite a big recap. I didn't do one at the end of the year last year for all the books that I read kind of like in the November to December time frame because it felt like a slower reading end of year period. So I was like, I'll just do it at the start of the new year. And here we are. It's like the same thing that we do at work where it's like, oh, like we'll just catch up in the new year, worry about that then. And then it's kind of like this feeling of like, that'll never come. That's future me's problem. And then the new year actually comes and you have to deal with the things that you were putting off at the end of the year. And this is that recap video for me because I just kept like finishing more and more books and now it's like, oh my god, my list of books that I haven't recapped is getting longer and longer, and it was just like overwhelming me, and I'm just at a point where I'm like dreading having to make this video, but I'm like, I just gotta do it because the longer I wait, the worse it's gonna be. So yes, this is going to be one of the longest recap videos in terms of like the amount of books that I have to talk about, but because there's so many books, I'm kind of gonna rapid fire. I say that every time that I'm gonna try to make it quick, try not to ramble, always end up rambling, always end up talking for like hours. But like physically, I don't know if I can do it for this many books, and I don't know if my battery can do it. And my memory card. So those are actual limiting factors that I'm working with. So I'm gonna try really hard. So why don't we just get into it so we can get it over with. I'm excited to talk about these books. I know it sounds like I don't want to talk about these books at all, but there are some good ones. Looking over this list, I'm like, I'm excited to talk about some of these. Before we do though, can we take a moment? I want to show y'all my socks. Don't disturb me, I'm reading. Cute, right? They were a gift from my dad for Christmas. I did get socks for Christmas and I'm not mad about it. Anyway, shall we get started? I am going to start off with a couple of nonfiction books that I read at the end of last year. I was admittedly trying to finish up my nonfiction book challenge that I was doing. So a couple of these, or actually mostly just one of them, was like not on my radar at all before this, but I did it for the challenge and we'll talk about it when we get there. But the first one I'm going to talk about is a memoir called In the Shadow of the Mountain by Silvia Vázquez Lavado, who is a Peruvian woman. This is a memoir of her summiting Mount Everest. She is the first Peruvian woman to ever summit Mount Everest. And I went into this book thinking that it was mostly going to be a memoir about Silvia's quest and her training and everything it took physically for her to climb Mount Everest. And I thought it was going to be like mostly recounting like beat by beat what it took and how it felt to climb Mount Everest, but really it ended up being mostly about Silvia's struggles and her very, very painful childhood and her experiences with repeated sexual violence and sexual assaults when she was a child in Peru, and later her struggles with alcoholism and like reckoning with the abuse that she experienced as a child. And then somehow like tying all of that to climbing and mountaineering and using that as a way to kind of work through her trauma and deal with her struggles. So this was a very powerful memoir. The subject matter was extremely hard to stomach. She goes into quite a bit of detail, and the things that she experienced as a child were really horrific. So I wasn't expecting that when I started reading this book, but I did enjoy it. I did think it was a very moving and a very impressive story. The memoir structure itself, we're kind of flashing between Sylvia's life, starting from her childhood and when she started experiencing this abuse. And then we continue into her adulthood and her coming to the US. And then that's when she started struggling with addiction and alcohol abuse and things like that. So we're going through that chronologically and then flashing between scenes of her quest to summit Mount Everest for the first time. And also during this, or before her actual summit attempt, she is leading a group of women who are also survivors of sexual assault to the Mount Everest base camp. So that is like a very treacherous hike that takes you to the base camp of Mount Everest, and that's where you start your summit attempt. So she's leading this group of girls through that first part of that hike to the base camp. So yeah, I enjoyed this memoir, but there was like something about it that's hard to put my finger on that like didn't quite click for me. I'm not sure if it was like the writing style or the structure or like a little mix of both that had me like unable to fully immerse myself in this story. And it's a memoir, so like I struggle with critiquing memoirs, but like I just think a little bit more editing, a little bit more like making the story more concise and connecting like the two different facets of this memoir, her childhood story and her summit of Mount Everest, like having those connect a little more seamlessly would have helped, because I feel like there was some kind of disconnect. I'm sure for Sylvia herself, like it makes sense how she got from this point to this point, but like I feel like that was just a little bit missing in this memoir. Just like talking about actually working through this trauma. And I do, while the stories of the individual women that she was taking with her on this base camp trek were also very powerful and very impactful, I do think they a little bit muddied like the thesis of this memoir. So I just think like a little bit of refining, a little bit more editing to pare it down a little bit would have made this an easier read for me, but still think it was a very good memoir, a very powerful one, and Sylvia's story is very impressive and important. So I think even though it's not like one of my all-time favorite memoirs, definitely a good one that'll stick with me for a while. Another memoir that I read in the last few months was Heartland, a memoir of working hard and being broke in the richest country on earth by Sarah Smarsh. So this is the memoir that I mentioned that I picked up really only because I was trying to complete this nonfiction challenge, and one of the prompts for that was blue-collar workers. So it had to be a nonfiction book about blue-collar workers or, you know, the working class in the US. So I picked this one up. It sounded interesting and it wasn't on my radar prior to this, but I'm really glad that I picked it up because I actually really enjoyed this memoir, and I think Sarah Smarsh has written a more recent nonfiction book about the same topic, but just kind of expanding on that, and I'm very interested in reading that because I enjoyed her memoir so much. So Sarah grew up in Kansas as a daughter of fifth-generation farm workers. So farming and agriculture has been in her family for many generations, and this is what they made their living on. But as Sarah is growing up in the 90s, things are kind of taking a turn in the United States, and her family struggles to make ends meet. And it's basically just a recounting of her life and stories from her parents and her grandparents and her family, and she just details a story that's not uncommon. It's pretty relatable, and I think it's probably the case for many people in the United States, working class people kind of like towing the line of poverty without even necessarily being aware of it, because one of the things that she talks about is how her family was definitely raised on the mentality of like pulling yourself up by the bootstraps and the American dream and like fighting and working hard for what you have. So it's a struggle to like ever see yourself as poor or lower class, even though like statistically, based on the amount of wealth and income that you have, you very much are on the poverty line. It's just a hard thing to swallow. A lot of people don't want to see themselves as needing help, as struggling, so they just refuse to ever ask for help. And that's kind of, that's something that she explores, along with a lot of other like political and social commentary, and tying it back to the things she saw growing up and the things that she experienced being from a flyover state in the middle of the United States. Sarah Smarsh is a journalist and she has a PhD, and this is specifically what she studies and reports on, poverty in the United States. So it was really, really well researched, or it felt very well researched. It felt very astute. She had a lot of great things to say from a perspective that I think a lot of the times gets overlooked. So yeah, even though it wasn't like anything groundbreaking, her story is a commonplace story in the United States, but I think that's what made it so impactful. She had a lot of great, smart things to say about that, and I really enjoyed it. I was very intrigued throughout this whole memoir. And this one and Silvia Vázquez Lavado's memoirs, both I listened to via audiobook, and they were both narrated by the author. Another nonfiction book that I read recently is Power Born of Dreams, My Story is Palestine by Mohammed Sabahaneh. This is a memoir as well, but it's a graphic novel, and it's a very, very short one. And it's all art that is done by the author, and it's all lino cuts that he made. And the art and the story was all written after he was captured and imprisoned by the Israeli army. And it depicts his time spent as a prisoner, and it also tells the story of Palestinian struggle and occupation, and he tells stories both about his own life and then stories that he's heard from the people that he meets, fellow prisoners and other Palestinians. And this book was published and the story was written all before 2023, so the escalation of all the violence and oppression of the Palestinian people hadn't reached like the height that it's at today. But it's still a very hard read, and it still shows just how long this occupation and genocide of the Palestinian people has been going on for. So it's still very relevant, and it's still very hard-hitting. The art and the words and everything is very beautiful and sad, and it's hard to say like I enjoyed this. It was a very good memoir, a very good graphic novel. Even though it's so short, it packs a very hard punch. And yeah, just a super important one, and even more so relevant in today's point of view. And now the last nonfiction, I believe, is the most recent one that I read, which was also an audiobook, also narrated by the author, and it was Trick Mirror: Reflections on Self-Delusion by Gia Tolentino. And this book is structured as a series of essays, and it's part memoir, part social commentary by Gia Tolentino. And Gia is Asian American. She was raised by Filipino parents in Texas, and she's a journalist. She writes for big publications, mostly about politics and social commentary and pop culture. So that's what this memoir was about. I think I struggle when memoirs try to have like a central thesis statement that is very clearly like kind of thrown together after the fact, trying to like piece all these essays by a common thread. So I feel like the title, like reflection on self-delusions and things like that, it's a little bit of a stretch. I can see how, they chose that title, but it's kind of a amalgamation of a lot of various random things that Gia Tolentino wanted to talk about. And some of these things include like the internet and living in the age of the internet, scams from the 21st century, from the big and juicy to like the more commonplace and everyday type of scams, reality TV, the wedding industrial complex, and all of these are explored through like a feminist point of view. And then Gia also ties back to things that she experienced in her life. So she as a teenager was a contestant on a reality show, and this was like the advent of reality TV. It was like very, very early, like during real world times. And then also like there was one essay where she talked about religion and growing up, going to one of these like Texas mega churches and growing up in a very strict and religious household, and then how her views evolved throughout her life and getting like that same sort of awe and ecstasy from doing drugs. And I don't know, it was interesting, but like a lot of the essays I struggled with like finding the point, like what are you really trying to say? Like, I don't know, I just didn't come away from it with like a new or different perspective on very many things. Although like her writing style, her voice was engaging. I didn't hate reading it. I was entertained the whole time. It felt very well researched. I just struggled to find what points she was trying to make with it all. So yeah, I didn't hate this one. It was fine, but it won't be very memorable to me in the long run. Okay, next, let's get into some of the fiction that I've read. One book that I really, really enjoyed at the end of the year was The Reformatory by Tananarive Due. So this book is a historical fiction horror novel that takes place in Florida during the Jim Crow era. And we're following the story of Robert Stevens, who is a young boy in this Florida town who gets accused of something by this very powerful white family who has a lot of influence on their town. And Robert gets thrown into a reformatory school, which is based on real life reformatory schools that really existed during this time period, where they would send like troubled or misbehaving kids, mostly young boys of color. So we're following his story as he gets thrown into the school and just all the horrible things that he has to go through, all the things that him and his fellow classmates at the school face and are subjected to. And then we're also following his older sister, Gloria, who is on the outside trying to get justice for her brother. She knows that he was thrown in there and accused unfairly, and she's a very smart young woman, and she's trying to see what she can do to help her brother get out of this school, because she has also heard and she knows about some of the horrible things that happen at these schools, and she wants to get her brother out. So we're following both of their POVs. And another element in this is a more speculative supernatural element, because Robert Stevens, he can see ghosts, or whites as they're called in this story. They're spirits of people who have passed but are still roaming the earth. So because so many horrible things have happened at this reformatory school, Robert Stevens is now surrounded by these whites at the reformatory school, and that's another added layer to the horrors that he's having to experience there. Now he's also getting like the stories and the trauma and all the things that these spirits of these young boys who have died there are recounting to him. So yeah, this story was very suspenseful, very engaging. I was in it for the story and then also for like the historical aspect of it. It's very powerful, very sad that, you know, this was all based on real events and real mistreatment of young boys of color. And yeah, it was a very powerful one. I enjoyed it a lot. Obviously some very hard-hitting themes, but also like the character development, the plot were all really great, and I loved this one. I gave it 5 stars. Definitely recommend this one if you're into historical fiction, horror. A very good one. Okay, next we're gonna get into some fantasy novels. I'm gonna kind of like fast track these. I'm also gonna bring this to my lap for easy access to my notes because a lot of these, it feels like I read them a long time ago, even though it hasn't even been that long. But yeah, they're a little bit blending together in my head, so I'm gonna pull up my notes right here. This book I read for one of my book clubs. We were trying to look for a book that was like, all of us hadn't read it before and it was somehow winter themed. So we picked A Winter's Promise by Christelle Davos. This is a fantasy young adult book. I wasn't aware going in, but it's kind of a Beauty and the Beast retelling. So just from that premise alone, you might be able to figure out if like this will be something that you enjoy or not, because if I had known, I probably wouldn't have picked it up. Beauty and the Beast retelling is just not my favorite historically. But yeah, this was an interesting take on it. At least it was pretty different. In this world, the earth has kind of shattered and split into different chunks. And each of these chunks has developed their own society, their own little ecosystem. I knew something was going to go wrong. I knew something wasn't going to be enough. And it was, in fact, the memory card. The memory card ran out of space, but we're so back. And I've got a second wind to talk to y'all about all these fantasy books. So, where was I? A Winter's Promise, right? Okay. Forget my notes. I'm gonna go off the dome here to just like rapid fire. I was saying in this world, the earth has split. People live in individual chunks of the earth and they're called arcs. Each arc has like its own society, its own rules, its own politics. And our main character, maybe I do need my notes. Ophelia. I didn't read my notes. That just came to me. Our main character, Ophelia, she is from one arc, and in order to maintain like appearances and relationships and for like political reasons that are not that well developed or explored in my opinion, her family arranges a marriage for her with a man from another one of these societies, from another one of the arcs. She's never met this man before, and she gets sent to live on this arc with her betrothed, and she's miserable. She doesn't want to go. And this man, once she does meet him, he's the worst. He's like dark and brooding and so ridiculously tall, but he's just very cold to her. He doesn't really speak to her. He's just very aloof and unfeeling, and she's supposed to marry this man. She obviously doesn't want to, and now she's in this place that she's unfamiliar with, and she's just trying to figure out what to do. She doesn't want to go through with this marriage, and she's also just trying to figure out how to survive in this world that's like completely new to her. So this is a fantasy world, and there are magical elements to it. Ophelia herself, she has the power, I forgot what they call it in the book, but basically if she touches something, like if she were to touch this laptop, she could see like all the history of everyone who's owned this laptop so she could look into like my memories. So she has that gift, and she can also travel through mirrors, which like they're very cool powers. I think the concept of these magical powers and then like the fantasy land that this takes place in is very cool. People basically have the power to glamour things, so things are enchanted, things are not what they seem in this new arc that Ophelia is sent to. But I just think a lot of the fantasy elements in this were really underutilized. Ophelia has two very cool and interesting powers, and we never really see them come into play at all during this story. Her character itself felt very flat. I never really connected to Ophelia and to any of the other characters. Like, they just felt very underdeveloped. There was no chemistry between our main character and then who we assume is going to be like the male lead love interest, Thorn, her fiance, who's just like a piece of cardboard. A very tall piece of cardboard. The plot there was none to speak of. There was a lot of characters that are introduced. Everything was just like a little too convoluted, and I don't know. I wasn't a fan of this one. I read it physically and I also listened to the audiobook. Yeah, there was just like some kind of disconnect there for me where I just couldn't get into the story. I couldn't connect with the characters. And this was unfortunately a no from me. Maybe part of the problem is that it's book one of like a 4-book series, and it was long, but I feel like nothing happened. Very little happened for such a long book, and I just feel like the plot didn't really go anywhere by the end, and I honestly have no desire to continue this book series. Who knows? Maybe it gets good. Maybe everything was just a big setup for some stuff to go down in the next few books, but I can't be bothered to find out, unfortunately. It just didn't engage me. So that was A Winter's Promise, a pretty disappointing one. Another book that I read that was kind of similar in concept, at least on a high level, was The Wolf and the Woodsman by Ava Reid. So in this one, we also have a young woman from a fantasy world who gets sent off with a cold, brooding, mysterious man. That is maybe where the similarities end. But, you know, on a high level concept, these are kind of the same. But in this one, we follow a girl named Eva Kay. She is from a village in this fantasy world where all the women in this village have some sort of magical power. Some of them are healers, some of them can start fires, and the most rare and coolest power that some of them have is that they are seers, so they can see into the future. They have these prophecies that come to them. But unfortunately, our main character, Eva Kay, is devoid of powers. She's powerless and therefore kind of the most inconsequential in her village. She's really good at hunting, which is like what every cool fantasy woman lead who has no powers is usually good at, hunting and fighting. So yeah, Eva Kay is like this badass hunter, but she has no powers, and in this world, every year, a group of woodsmen come to this village and demand a woman as a sacrifice in order to keep the peace in the realm. We do get a little bit more into it, but at the beginning, we're just kind of presented this, and it's like, yeah, every year, a girl has to die, unfortunately. So, this year, the woodsmen come, and they specifically demand that the woman sacrificed is a seer. And the village doesn't have a lot of seers to give up, and that's also a very powerful trait to have, so they also don't want to lose their seers. So they tell Eva Kay to just pretend. They're like, we'll just tell them that you're a seer, and, you know, that we're giving you up. You're the sacrifice. You have no powers, so you're not a big loss for us. So there you go. And so Eva Kay gets taken by these woodsmen, and the story goes from there. This one, compared to A Winter's Promise, was a lot more interesting, a lot more engaging. Character development was a lot better. I really liked our main character, Ivake, and I did really like our male lead, Gaspar. He's one of the woodsmen, and he at first was just kind of like this dark, brooding, moody character, but then we learn more about him. He gets a little more depth, and I did enjoy Ivake and Gaspar's chemistry. The world was also more well developed. It was apparently based a lot on Eastern European folklore as well as Jewish history. So one of the main themes in this book was persecution based on religious beliefs. So there was a lot of discrimination for different religious beliefs and different backgrounds and like these fantasy ethnicities in this world, but they were like largely based on real history and politics. So all the like political intrigue and things in this world were really interesting and really well done, I think. Especially in like the first half of this book, I was really hooked and interested. And then I do feel like it suffered a little bit from pacing in the second half. Like a lot of things happened in the second half. I just felt like the story kept going and going and going. And at some point I just expected it to end, and it just kept going. But it was still an interesting story. I overall enjoyed it. Like I said, I enjoyed our character development. The plot, while I think it did suffer from like some of these pacing issues, overall I liked. My one gripe is that with the like romantic relationship between our main characters, this is like, I wouldn't call it a fantasy romance, but there was like a romance element in it. But a lot of that was just like sexual tension based on the fact that the woodsmen make a chastity promise when they become part of like this brotherhood. And Ivake just like will not stop mentioning this. She's like, oh, he wants me so bad, but like he's part of the... She doesn't talk like this. This isn't that type of book. This is just like me translating it into my speak. Yeah, she's just like, oh my god, like he's a virgin and he just like has never been with a woman before and he wants me. And then once, spoiler alert, things do happen. After that, she just keeps bringing up the fact that he broke his vow, and she's like, oh, what? Like, you're too impure for me now? Like, you're ashamed because this happened? Like, you're tainted now? Like, I'm sorry. And she just, like, that's the only thing. I just feel like this kept being brought up as, like, the sexual tension in this book, and it was just, like, a little much, but that's, I think, my only complaint about this book. Besides that, I enjoyed it a lot, and especially after A Winter's Promise, I was like, this has a lot of, like, what I've been missing. I don't think it's, like, a new favorite or anything. It probably won't stick in my mind for much longer, but I enjoyed it in the moment. And I am looking forward to reading more of Ava Reed's because she's been on my radar, and I enjoyed this one enough that I do want to pick up another one of her books. So that was The Wolf and the Woodsman. Okay, one more fantasy romance book, and this is the best one of the bunch because I also read Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands by Heather Fawcett. This is book 2 in the Emily Wilde series, and it has a lot of the same beats. If you've read book 1, book 2 will feel very familiar to you. We are following Emily Wilde once again. She's a scholar and a professor of dryadology, which is the study of fairies. And we're following along in her academic endeavors alongside Wendell, who is also a fellow professor and also our love interest. So, like in book 1, there's a quest that Emily and Wendell have to go on that's fairy related. So they end up going to a small, quaint town that's just like on the edge of the human world and the fae world. And then from there, the adventure begins. They eventually go into the fae world. Hijinks ensue. It was great. I liked it, I think, even more than book one. The chapters, once again, they're written as journal entries by Emily, and just the writing style, the humor, the tone, Heather Fawcett, I love it. I love it. It's just so cozy and comforting because of like the descriptions of the village that they stay at, all the local townspeople, the beautiful picturesque setting, the charming folklore. But then there's also very high stakes. There's action, there's adventure, there's drama, there's violence, and yeah, it feels like the stakes are actually high for our main characters, and I really enjoy that juxtaposition because it's cozy enough, it's comforting enough, it's funny, but at the same time I'm like on the edge of my seat wanting to know what's going to happen, wanting to make sure that our beloved characters are going to be okay. So I love that balance. And yeah, Emily Wilde, I love these books. I'm really looking forward to book 3, although it is the last one, so I'm kind of sad that it's going to end, but I really want to know what's going to happen with Emily and Wendell. Oh my gosh. Yeah, this was a great read as always. Perfect for the season. Okay, we're getting towards the end. These next couple of books I am going to put up my notes for because they were my most recent reads, and I think I remember them well enough to just talk about them off the cuff, hopefully. But the next book I started reading during my last vlog, but I didn't talk about my thoughts after finishing it, so that was Is This a Cry for Help by Emily Austen. This is my 4th Emily Austen book. She's one of my favorite writers, and this book just released this month on January 13th, but I got an advanced copy and I read it a few weeks before release, and I loved it. Surprise, surprise. Emily Austen, she does it again. She writes a great lesbian, neurodivergent, character-driven book. So quick recap of the general things that happen in this book. We follow Darcy. She is a librarian, and when we meet Darcy, she's just coming back to work after she took a 2-month break from the library from working because she had a mental breakdown. Darcy is in her 30s and she's married, she has a wife, she has some cats that she loves, she has her dream job, her life is great, but she finds out that Ben, her ex-boyfriend, passed away, and even though that relationship happened quite a few years ago at this point, she doesn't take it very well and she has like a nervous breakdown. And she has to go into a facility for a few weeks and then take some time off work. So we meet her after she comes back from that break, but she's still dealing with the fallout of all this, and she feels a lot of guilt. Even though Ben's death really had nothing to do with her, she just has a lot of unresolved feelings and things left over from that relationship that she hasn't quite explored. She dealt with a lot of like compulsive heterosexuality when she was with him because, you know, this was before she had come out as gay. She was really trying to fit a mold that she felt like she had to fit into with, you know, being in a relationship with a man and not really knowing who she was. And even though it wasn't a perfect relationship, you know, as we reflect on it with her, there's a lot of things that were pretty toxic and not ideal from both of their ends of the relationship. But we also see that there was a lot of love and care and tenderness in that relationship, like there tends to be with any relationship that doesn't work out. And so yeah, we see her explore this grief and guilt, and we also see her reflect and contrast that relationship to the one she's in now with her wife. And that exploration and that description of her relationship now is really sweet and really tender. And I really appreciated that in this book, our protagonist is kind of like in a better stage of life than a lot of past Emily Austen protagonists, because I've loved those protagonists and books as well, but sometimes they can be very heavy, and the things that those protagonists are going through are just more tough. Not that like dealing with grief and loss isn't tough, but like the moments when we came back to the present and like Darcy's life at home and this beautiful life that she's built with her wife Joy was just like really comforting, and I really liked reading about that. And on top of this, Darcy is also dealing with these mounting attacks on the library that she works at from like radical conservative alt-right groups who are trying to ban drag story hours. They're trying to ban books from the library. They're trying to get people riled up against the library and the community programs that they offer. So this was also in part kind of just a love letter to libraries. We talk a lot about like the resources and the programs that are offered through libraries and how they do a lot more than just like lend out books. They're also, you know, a place where the community comes together. They're a place that protects free speech. It protects intellectual freedom. They do a lot for the community, and that part of the book was also just very relevant to the political environment right now. I enjoyed that part as well, and I thought the way that Emily Austen tied it all together was quite beautiful. And yeah, just another great book by Emily Austen. And the last book in a recap, we have made it. I think I talked quite fast. I'm sure this will still be hella long, but I'm just proud of myself for even making it this far. The last book, the most recent book that I've read, is We Spread by Ian Reid. It was an audiobook listen, excellent audiobook. Ian Reid is the author of I'm Thinking of Ending Things and Foe, both of which have been adapted into movies, both of which I've read and really, really enjoyed. And this is his most recent novel. It is also like a speculative horror novel. In this one, we follow a woman named Penny. Penny is an older woman. We meet her when she's living on her own. Her partner of many, many years has passed away. And we see her kind of starting to struggle with some of like her basic life things. It's getting harder for her to be able to just live and do everyday things on her own. And she's also starting to become increasingly paranoid. There are like some weird things that are happening. She's hearing noises from the unit next door, even though there's nobody living there. She feels like people are watching her. And yeah, we just see her becoming increasingly paranoid. And one day she has a fall. And after this, her landlord is the one who finds her and helps her. And he's like, okay, I think it's time, Penny. And he informs her that before her partner died, they had made arrangements for Penny to live in an assisted care facility once she wasn't able to live on her own. And so with the help of her landlord, Penny moves to this facility, even though she feels like she can still live on her own. So because these arrangements she has no recollection of these arrangements, but apparently they had been made. So she's like, I guess I have no choice. I have to go to this facility now. So she goes to this facility, and the rest of the book kind of goes from there. the main theme of this book really is aging, and it's a horror novel, and it does get like more and more suspenseful, and like things start happening that we're not really sure how to explain. And there is this question of like, is this just a symptom of Penny's like deteriorating mind as she's growing older, or are there like more sinister things underlying everything? Because yeah, she comes to this facility and like on the one hand she does find a lot of relief that she wasn't expecting, because she talks about how like she just hadn't had a lot of human contact in the last few years. Nobody visits her. She never had any children, so her communication and just like interactions with people have lessened. So coming to this facility, and there's other people here, other residents that she can talk to and interact with, and she actually really enjoys that. And then there's also the things that are being done for her. She's being treated well. There's like a delicious meal being fed to her every day. Her hair is getting washed. She's getting pampered. The sheets are cleaned and changed every day. And she's like, these are things that I forgot how nice it is to have. They're things that have been neglected by her for a long time because she was like mobility impaired and things like that. So she actually finds a lot of relief by coming to this assisted care facility. But there's also like really weird things that happen that are unexplained, and she's a little suspicious of everything going on. So she just has like these lapses in memory. And yeah, people say weird things that make it seem like she's been here for a long time, but really she just got here like last week. And yeah, there's just some really strange stuff that feels like there might be something more sinister going on, and it feels like a lot of gaslighting of Penny because she's in a vulnerable position. But yeah, I think at the root of all of this is just an exploration of the deep-seated fear that all, if not most of us, have of growing old, and what happens when our minds and bodies start deteriorating, and just the fear of being alone at the end of it all, and of just losing sight of what we used to love, who we are, the things that make life worth living. And yeah, I think that was like the real horrific part of all of this, was just really diving into, oh yeah, this might be us at the end of the day. So yeah, it was like equally horrific and beautiful in a way. And in Ian Reid's fashion, it was very mindfucky. Like, you don't really know what's going on the entire time. Just some really strange things are happening, but there's also like this exploration of aging. So yeah, this was a really good one. Unexpected how profound it was and how touching it was a lot of the time. But it was a very propulsive read, a very quick read, and I really enjoyed it. The end was not the most satisfying to me, but I think that's part of like what makes an Ian Reid novel is that he kind of leaves it up to you to determine what you think was going on the entire time, what you take away from all of this. So yeah, I mean, I have my theories, and there are many theories, you know, if you go digging after you read. A lot of discussions happening on Reddit and everything. So there is that, but just at the end of the novel itself, I don't think there's like a definitive answer. But I don't really mind that with an Ian Reid novel. Yeah, I really enjoyed that one. And that brings us to the end of this video. Whew, I do feel like my voice is going a little bit, and my allergies are really, really bad right now, so my nose is just really stuffed up too. I am gonna go make myself a tea or something and just not talk for the rest of the day. But yes, finally talked about all the books that I read at the end of last year, beginning of this year. Hopefully I can do these more consistently, and I won't have to wait until I have to make one big video like this again. But I enjoyed it anyway. Always enjoy talking about books, of course. Let me know what you've been reading. Hopefully 2026 is off to a good start for you. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.